How are you, David?
Rabbi, how are you?
Okay, thank God. How's everything?
Good, good. You surprised me from
sometimes,
Israel.
sometimes I
Yeah,
surprise myself.
yeah. How is Israel?
Fantastic.
Okay.
The weather is beautiful here. It's nice and cool this week,
Mm,
and very peaceful, very quiet.
yeah. How is everybody? How are the children?
Having a nice time with them. Very nice. Good kids. God bless them.
That's awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, that's the main reason why I came. But whatever.
Hmm. Yeah. All right. Hopefully the others will join us.
What do you call it? What I want to say.
Hmm.
So, are you dating somebody now?
No.
No. Okay. All right. Hope you find somebody soon.
Yeah. Time is running out.
Okay. It's never too late. I can do. I think I gotta do the Facebook, right? I didn't do it. Let me just see if I can catch that. Facebook. Okay. You should move here, Dave. All of us
Then do
should.
what?
All of us should.
Mm.
Live your life.
It's not easy to survive there.
Yeah. We hope for the best. Okay.
The cost of real estate is completely out of control.
Well, it's comparable to America, basically. Sometimes it's even cheaper.
Yeah.
Depends on where you go. Okay. We did the Facebook, so let's get started. Looks like we're up to Tet over here. Uh, so it says over here, ולא גודלין אותה ולא מהבהבים אותה עד ויכול לשרותה בשמן. Let's see inside the tour itself. We have to see inside. Yeah. So it says here, below. So what does this mean? What that means is that you shouldn't make a wick, on Yom Tov. How do you do that? By intertwining, like thin threads, and you make like a thicker thread. So, and also, לא מהבהבים, את הפירוש להחריכה, כדי שתהא נוחה להדליק. So also another thing he says you shouldn't do is to prepare the wick by singeing it with fire in order that it should be easier to light. So these are two things he says you should not do in Yom Tov. Interesting. אבל אם הייתה גדולה כבר, אלא שאינה קשה כל צורכה. But if it was already, right, intertwined together, but it's not hard enough. יכול למעכה בידו, so you can make it how do you say this, right? You squeeze it with your hand, with your fingers, in order to make it harder. ויכול לשרותה בשמן. And also it says you can soak it in oil. ומותר להסיר הפחם שבראש הנר. This we already spoke about a little bit before. You're allowed to remove the ashes, which are on the top of the wick. כשהוא דולק, when it's lit. ואפילו בכלי, even with a utensil you can do this, some kind of tweezer. אף על פי שנופלת לארץ, even though it's falling to the ground, right, this burnt part, the kavta, and right, and it goes out, gets extinguished. So it says, והרמב"ם ז"ל אוסר בכלי ולא נראה לאדוני ויורשו. So it says the Rambam forbids to do this with a utensil. But the Rosh seems to disagree with that. Okay, so that's the story there. So that's the end of the chapter in the tour. Okay, so let's go to the Beit Yosef. So regarding this, says the Beit Yosef, Baraita Hashem, right, there's a Baraita over there in this Gemara. Peresh Rashi explains the Mishnah, the Petila Klihi Ladlaka. So he says, right, that the wick is a utensil for the sake of lighting. Shetsicha asi'ah, and therefore it needs to be made, right? Whatever, right? Manufactured, whatever you want to call it, right? The tikkun, and it needs to be, right, prepared. Mitam ze en godlin velo mehavim ota. So therefore, he says, this is the reason why we can't, right, do that intertwining, business, right? Twining, right, the wick, and also to, as we said, right, to singe it. So what does that mean? You're making a kli, you're making a utensil. This is the reason why you can't do it on Yom Tov. Okay, so then it goes on. כתב הרוקח, הדייכול לשרותה בשמן כשאין הנר דולק. So he says, that which we said, that you're allowed to soak it in oil, that's talking about when the candle is not lit. But if it's already lit, אז חייב משום מכבה. So then you would be liable because of extinguishing. שמסתפק מן השמן פשוט, because you're taking away from the oil, right? You're removing the oil from the candle. And he said it's very clear, right? Very simple, the whole thing. Okay, that's the end of it. Wow, it's very short. Okay. So that's a short one. Good. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch here. So it says as En chotechina petila lebet ela im ken. We did this one. We gotta go to the next one. Right. So it says here, En godlin petila velo me'avimim ota. So as we said, right, we shouldn't, right now I remember the English term that applies to this. It's called braiding, right? You braid the wick. right? By twining it around like that, right? That's the thing. So you cannot do this on Yom Tov, to prepare the wick like that. Also, as we said, you cannot singe it. So we already said the reason why you would singe the wick would be in order that it should be easier to light because it dries it out. And this way the fire catches on really fast. It makes it more lightable, if you want to use that word, right? Whatever. אבל אם אינה קשה, כל צורכה יכול למאכל. But he says, on the other hand, right, if it's not hard enough, you're allowed to, as we said, right, roll it into your fingers, to harden it with your fingers. Roll it around in your fingers. What's a good word for this? You can mash it with your fingers, right? Mash. Okay, whatever, right? Mashing it with your fingers, and in order to harden it, mutar lishrotan b'shemen. Also, as we said, right, you're allowed to soak it in oil. So in the parentheses, he reminds you here, right, which is important to know. Shen boner dolek. That's only when, right, it's not lit the wick, right? But when it's lit, you can't do that because otherwise you're extinguishing it. So that's clear, right? Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll go on to the next one. There seems to be one more here. So I'll go to the next one. We don't really do this much today, We don't prepare wicks, right? We buy them, ready made in the store, right? All these things. So we don't really deal with this much today. But it is what it is, right? Whatever. Right? Sometimes, when I see something is not practical, I skip it, but whatever. This one crept in there. So the truth is, it is sort of practical because we do sometimes, singe the wick. This is something that people do today also, especially the Ashkenazim. They like to singe it, before they light it. So this way it makes it easier for them to light it. I've seen this, with the Ashkenazim. They have this custom like that. Sometimes what happens is that the husband does this, The husband prepares the wick for the wife, for her to light it by singeing it. So as we said, right, you can't do this on Yom Tov. So then what are we talking about that it's allowed to do that? We're talking about before Shabbat, right, or before Yom Tov. So then you can do it. It's not a problem. You can do whatever you want, right? That's a different issue. Okay, right. But on Yom Tov itself, as we said, you shouldn't singe it. Okay, good to know. It's good to know. Very good. So we're going to Yud, which seems to be like the last one here. So he says here, right? So we already read this in the tour. So what the tour said was you can remove the ashes on top of the wick. This you can do. We already spoke about this a little bit. So says Bit Yosef right here. Sham Amar Rav Natan Bar Abba Amar Rav Mochatin et hapetila beyom tov. Mai Mochatin Amar Rav Chanina Bar Shlemia b'shmed Rav le'aduye choshecha ufirish Rashi le'aduye choshecha כשהיא נעשית בראשה פחם מעבירה. Right, so exactly what we said, right? The Gemara says that you're allowed to remove the ashes on top there, right? In other words, the burnt part of the wick, right, which is already charred and burned. So you don't want that anymore, so you remove it. That's what you do, right? כתב הראש לידו יחשך מסיר ראש הפתילה שנשרף ונעשה פחם ומחשיך את הנר ואף על פי שמפילו לארץ. So he says that, right, even though this stuff like falls to the ground, this burnt part of the wick, and then it gets extinguished, mutar. So it says, nevertheless, it's allowed to do that. Kemo shehu, right, as is. Mutar להדליק את הנר, להשתמש לאורו. Just like it's allowed, he says, right, to light the candle in order to use its light. כך מותר לכבות מה שמונע הדלקת הנר. So therefore, you're allowed to also put out, right, extinguish the part which prevents the light of the candle, from shining brightly. Good point. Okay. So the Rambam, so he says, he brings the Rambam here, asar lehasiro bekli. He forbade to remove it, as we said, right? The Tur said this. the Rambam forbids to remove it with a utensil. ואפשר להחשיב כתיקון כלי שהוא מתקן הפתילה ולא מסתבר. So he says like that it's, because the Rambam holds that obviously that you're preparing something new there, you're making something new, you're fixing it, whatever it is, you're fixing it. It's not really something new, but you're fixing something which is not in the best shape. So the Rambam forbids that. So as we said, right, the Rosh doesn't agree with this. Then kan tikun kli v'gam v'kama mochatin. So as the Rosh says, right, that doesn't agree with this Rambam. Why is that? Because he says that you're not really fixing anything here. It's more like just upkeep, just like you're doing the keeping it in shape, keeping it usable. וגם מדקאמר מוחתין סתם, משמע דבכל עניין מותר. So it says also, it says in the language of the Talmud itself, it seems to be allowed, because it just doesn't, it says it in an undefined manner. So what does that mean? Undefined manner doesn't tell you, right, whether you can use a utensil or your hands. Either way, it's allowed. So therefore, right, apparently what it means is that it's allowed in every manner, including using a utensil. That's what it is. Okay, good. So then he goes on here, V'zeh lashon Rambam. So he says, this is the language of the Rambam, Perek Daled, in the 4th chapter, אינו חותך את הראש הפתילה בכלי, אבל נופץ את הראשה בידו. Right? So the Rambam says like this, don't do it with a utensil, but you can do it with your hand. כתב רב מגיד, right? By the way, why is it allowed to do it with your hand? Because it's a shinoi, right? It's like, it's an abnormal manner. It's not the normal way. So you're doing a shinoi. Okay, so בכלי אבל נופץ את הראשו בידו, כתב רב מגיד, דמינמינן גבי אין חותכין את הפתילה לשניים, מאי שנה בסכין דלא כמתקן מנה, באור נמי מתקן מנה, סובר רבנו שכשם שאינו חותכין אותה בכלי, כך אינו חותך פיה בכלי, כשאמרו מוחתין דווקא ביד, אבל שאר המפרשים אומרים שלנופץ את הראשה אפילו בכלי מותר. So he's telling you, right, that the Rambam holds it's forbidden. The other commentaries hold that it's allowed, as we saw already. אפילו בכלי מותר, כשאמרו מוחתין רצו לומר שאפילו במחט. So what their claim is like this, as we said, right, that since in the Talmud doesn't differentiate between using a utensil or just doing it with your hand, so that implies that it's allowed to do in any manner. Okay, בכלי מותר כשאמרו מוחתין רצו לומר שאפילו מחט מותר להסיר חשיכה, וזהו דת השגות. So he says this is the opinion of the Hasagot, right? Who's the Hasagot? The Ravad, right? The arch, right, enemy of the Rambam, right? I'm speaking hyperbole, right? He wasn't the enemy, but he argued with him all the time, So in halacha, he was his enemy, right? When it comes to that, right? So, right, he says, the opposite of the Rambam, right? It's allowed to do with the utensil. Okay, that's good. All right. Well, so the Rashba also agrees, right? So it seems like most of the commentaries here allow this, as opposed to the Rambam, right, who does not allow. Then the Mukhrach, but he says, you know what? He says it's not so convincing, right? So it seems like he's not very convinced by this. Okay, interesting. All right. Okay, good. So then he goes on. מדברי רש"י, right, והראש, נראה שאין מותר להעביר אלא ראש הפתילה שהוא עשוי פחם. So he says the Bit Yosef comments on this, right? That from Rashi and the Rosh, it seems like you can only remove the burnt part, right, which is on the top, as we said. Okay. לחתוך את גוף הפתילה, לא, but it says to cut the wick itself, no, this we cannot do, right? We don't allow that. The good part, right? The part which is not burnt. Okay, so וכן יש לדקדק מדברי הרמב"ם. So it said that's the way also you can imply, it implies from language of Rambam as well. שכתב ואינו חותך ראש הפתילה בכלי. So he says, right, the Rambam like this, you don't cut the top of the wick with a utensil, אבל נופץ ראשה בידו, right? As we said, right, you can do with your hand, right? But he stresses in his language here, you can do the top, right? Not any part of the wick. That's the thing, right? So he says, since he didn't write that you can cut, right, the top with his hand, the Katani Resha, like it says in the beginning, so he says the language of the Rambam implies that you cannot cut the top of the wick, that means the body of the wick, even with your hand you can't do that. Why is that? Because it's not burnt. So he says, why? So he says the reason is because it's the way to do this with a utensil, this kind of a operation, right? Whatever, right? Procedure. Okay, so the havim kimitaken mana. So he says, therefore, it's considered to be like you're, making you're fixing a utensil. Aval nofetz rosha beado. But he says, on the other hand, right? You can do it with your hand, right? Cut the top. That means you can remove the ashes on the top, right? The burnt part there, right? The charred part on the top. Even with you can do this even with a needle, he says. Because that is the way to do that is with your hands. So therefore, it's not considered like you're fixing a utensil, even if you do it with a utensil. Okay, so that's a different way of seeing the Rambam here, right? A different way of interpreting this a little bit than what we saw before. Okay, interesting. So then he goes on, right? Kataba Mordechai, right? It says the Mordechai, Beresh Betza, in the beginning of the Masechet Betza, right? Anashim hamadlikot nerot umechabot otam מבעוד יום, יפה עושות בערב ראש השנה, או ערב יום טוב שלפני השבת, או ערב השבת מלפני יום טוב, משום הכנה עד כאן, וטעמו מפני מה שנתברר בסימן תק"א, right? So, this is just what I told you a couple of minutes ago, right? Which is that there are some people who have custom, right, like this. I see in Ashkenazi families this thing, right? Which is that they do like a pre-lighting, before Shabbat or before Yom Tov. So what does that mean? They light it up and they put it out, right? So what's the purpose of that? To make it easier to light before Shabbat. So he says, right, the Mordechai, that the women who do this custom like that, it's a good thing, right? It's positive kind of a action there, right? Good, okay. So because you're preparing, right, the wick properly to light it before Shabbat, before Yom Tov. בליל שני של ראש שנה או בליל יום טוב שאחר השבת אסור להדליק לשיעורי פתילה שכאבו בראשון לדעת קצת פוסקים מפני שבמה שכאבו בראשון מוכנו להדליק בהם פעם שנית והבה למכין בשבת ליום טוב ואסור אם לא שהודלק ונכבה מערב שבת הוא כבר נתבאר שאין הלכה כן. So it's interesting, right? He says here the theory behind this whole custom is like this, that we already mentioned, right, in the past, last week, whatever it was, that we don't want a person doing this on the second night of Yom Tov, right, or the Yom Tov that comes after Shabbat, to prepare the wick, for lighting. We don't want this. So what does that mean? That you're not allowed to light whatever was left over from the first lighting, from the first night. Right? According to some poskim, according to some opinions. Because that is like a preparation. So therefore he says, in order to fix that problem, what they do is they light it before Shabbat and put it out. And this way, right, it solves your problem. Now you can do it. And you can also light the second night. But he points out here a bit to himself that the halacha is not like this, So therefore, we don't really have to be concerned about this issue. So what does that mean? What I want to tell you is like this, right? That halacha is that even though you lit the first night the candle, right, and then it got left over, you can still light it the second night. There's no prohibition for that. Right, so therefore we don't really have to, do some kind of a preventative measure here in order to avoid this prohibition by lighting it before Shabbat or before Yom Tov, in order that we should avoid having to do this, to redo the lighting later on, right, in a forbidden manner. It's not halakha. Bottom line, right? Okay, so that's good enough. Okay, so let's see the Shulchan Aruch, right? And we'll see what he says here. Somehow I go ahead to the next one here. Let me just see what's going on. Yeah. So as we said, right? Says Shulchan Aruch, mutar le'asir ha'pecham sheberosh haner. You're allowed to remove, right, the ashes, right, whatever, the charred wick it's on top of the candle, right? Even though it's lit, but what we don't allow is for you to cut, the good part of the wick, right? Just because then you're making like you're preparing something new there. So what's the reason why we allow this? Because it's just upkeep, right? It's not really making something new. You're just removing, the garbage, right? Which is the burnt part of the wick. It's not really, you're not making something new. You're just keeping the function going. That's what it is, So therefore, there's no problem regarding, making something new there. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll go on. Okay. So let's go to Yud Aleph, and it seems to be one more here. So we'll read that in the Bet Yosef. Two we already finished. So it says over here in the Bet Yosef, Katub De'agot Asheri, right? It says in this book, the Perek HaMevi Kadeyain, right? In this Perek of the Gemara, וברוקח, also in רוקח, המדליק בליל יום טוב צריך לברך אשר קדישנו במצוותיו וציוונו להדליק נר של יום טוב, right? So when you light the candle for Yom Tov, this is the blessing you make, right? אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו להדליק נר של Yom Tov, right? And you don't say Shel Shabbat because it's not Shabbat. By the way, let's say if you made a mistake, right, and you said Shabbat by mistake, do you have to make another blessing? So the answer apparently is no. You fulfilled your obligation, even though you said Shabbat. Why is that? What's the reason why? Anybody know? So the reason is because Yom Tov is also called Shabbat in the Torah, in the Chumash. So therefore, so lechatchila, you really should say Yom Tov, because that's the real name. But if you said Shabbat b'diavad, so you're good, you're okay, because it's also called Shabbat. Why is Yom Tov called Shabbat? Because it's a day of rest, like just like Shabbat. So therefore, right, you're okay.
Does it go the other way around?
That's a good question. I would probably venture to say no. Right, because we never find that Shabbat is called Yom Tov. So right, this we don't find anywhere. So therefore, you probably have to bless again, right? But right, there's a rule like this. Maybe you guys already know this rule. But if you don't, I'll remind you, right? I'll teach you something
Bracha
new.
doesn't make the mitzvah.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, for sure. No question about that. But you do have to bless, right? If you can. You know what I mean? So you're right. The bracha doesn't make the mitzvah. You're right. But you do have to bless, So lechatchila, you got to bless. As long as the mitzvah is still going, You didn't stop the mitzvah, right? You didn't finish the mitzvah yet. It's still going there. So therefore, right, what you can do is like this, if you made a mistake and you said Yom Tov, right, the best thing to do is correct it right away, Say Yom Tov, Shabbat, right? That will be good, If you can correct it within like 2 seconds, you're good. You guys know this rule? Right? That's called Toch Kedei Dibur, right? You correct it within 2 seconds, which is the amount of time that it takes to say Shalom Alecha Rabbi Moi, right? How are you, my rabbi, right? So how are you, rabbi? Nice to see you. Okay. So if you can correct it within 2 seconds, you're good. You don't have to bless again. But if you waited longer than that, right? Let's say you waited 5 seconds, right? So then you're already, you're as I say, you're up the creek somewhere, right? So therefore you gotta bless again. That's what you gotta do. What can you do, right? You made a mistake. What can you do? God bless, right? Hashem should help us. So that's the story, yeah. So make sure, right, you know which holiday you're lighting for. This way you don't have any problems. Okay. Keep everything in mind, And, be cognizant of what's going on. Okay. So, right. By the way, since we're on this topic, also I want to tell you guys something very important. Okay. Which is that, a lot of people, unfortunately, make this mistake, which is that they first light the candles and then they bless afterwards. And you should know, by the way, that this is the custom of the Ashkenazim, they do it this way. But for Sephardim, this is forbidden to do it this way. Why is that? Because all the Rishonim, Shulchan Aruch, Rambam, and right, so forth and so on, right? They all say that, also in the Talmud it says, right? First you make the blessing and then you do. That's the way it works, So it doesn't work the opposite way. According to the Rambam, by the way, it's a blessing in vain if you do it like that. So it's a problem. Make sure you get this right. Do it the right way. So the Talmud says, right, that the only time where the blessing is made after the mitzvah is when a convert, right, converts, and goes into the mikveh, right? Usually the woman who goes to the mikveh makes the blessing first and then goes to the mikveh. But a convert first goes in, and then when he comes out, he makes the blessing, right? This is the way we do it today. So why is that, by the way? Because since he's a goy, until he goes in, he can't make the blessing yet, right? So therefore, right, it's just a matter of the essence of this mitzvah, doesn't allow that. So therefore, the rabbi said, let him make the blessing when he comes out. Right? The ger, the convert. But when it comes to all the other mitzvot, comes first the bracha, and then comes the mitzvah. That's the way it goes, right? So make sure you don't make this mistake, right? And do it the wrong way, There aren't many Ashkenazim who do it this way. And by the way, there are also some copycat, Sfardim who also learned from the Ashkenazim to do it this way. And, they're mistaken, unfortunately. This is not good for them. No good, right? So don't get yourself into trouble. So now let me ask you a question, right? If that's the case, why did the Ashkenazim do it this way?
Because they accept Shabbat on saying the blessing.
Right. Well, the truth is, right? Yeah, you got a good point there, but the truth is that's not really enough to justify. So why is that, by the way? What's the reason why it's not enough? Because, right, obviously, when they Ashkenazim, right, they accept Shabbat, when they make the blessing, what that means is they accept it after they light it, right? It doesn't mean they accept it after the blessing. You know what I mean? That's the way to understand it, right? You have to understand that. Otherwise, it's like a misnomer, like it's illogical. That's what it really means. So therefore, that's not really good enough of an excuse. You get my drift? So, right. So then what is the reason that they do it this way, right? That's not really good enough, that reason. So the truth is, that even though it's not good enough, but mistakenly, right, they thought it was. This is why the custom came in, to do it this way. So because of that, what happened was, right, that a lot of the poskim, the later authorities, and and whatever, all that stuff, right? They analyze. I'm talking about the Ashkenazi poskim. They analyzed this custom of the Ashkenazim, and their conclusion was that they don't understand why they do it this way. That was their final conclusion. So there's a lot of Ashkenazi rabbis who have written that it's not a good custom, this custom, because they understand, right, that there's no justification for it. But it is a custom. So the question is, if the rabbis don't like this custom, then how did this custom creep in? You know what I mean? That's the question, right? The rabbis don't like it. So the answer is, that the ladies started to do it, because the ladies thought, like you said, right, that you take on Shabbat when you bless, right? It's not true. You take on Shabbat when you light. That's what it really means. So because of this mistaken notion that they had, they took on this custom in a mistaken manner, But then what happened was they stuck to the custom, and the rest is history, right? As they say. So, right, so this is the reason why the truth is that if even an Ashkenazi woman wants to do it the right way, she can do it. There's no problem with that, because the truth is that there's a lot of problems with this. But there's also to justify the Ashkenazi custom a little bit, right? What they try to say is like this, right? That okay, so then, right? How can you make the blessing right after the mitzvah? You already did the mitzvah. How can you make the blessing? So what they say is that they cover their eyes, and this way, right, they don't see the light, So that so the mitzvah is not done, before the blessing, right? Which is not really a good reasoning there. Another right, the bad excuse, right, for this thing, right, whatever. So there's a lot of bad excuses here, for all this. But it is what it is. What can I tell you? So the proper thing to do, especially for the Sfaradim, right, who have no justification to do it this way, right? As we said, right, the Sfaradim they have no choice. The Ashkenazim at least have a custom, So they have something there. But the Sfaradim, they have no custom like this, so therefore they should always make the blessing first and then light the candles. Right? That's the way it should be done. Okay. All right. That was my job to tell you, right? By the way, my rabbi, Maran Abba Shalom, he used to speak about this a lot, and this was one of his, like, how would you call this, right? One of his meat and potatoes kind of things, that he innovated in halacha, right? Told people to stop doing this, and it worked. I mean, now a lot of people don't do it anymore, right? Like they used to. Talking about the Sfaradim, the Ashkenazim still do it. Most of them they still do it. Yeah, but okay, whatever. It is what it is. So anyway, right? That's one of the things. So let's go on a little bit. Right? That was a blessing, right? As I said, for Yom Tov, b'katzva God, Maimoniot, Perkei Min Chot Shabbat, v'Amordechi Perkei Klam Memleki. So these rabbis wrote, right? Then what? Dehachi Ita B'Yerushalmi. That's also written in Yerushalmi, right? Then what? That this is the blessing for the candles on Yom Tov, right? Le'adlik der shel Yom Tov, right? By the way, what do you bless for? When you light candles for Yom Kippur, some have the custom to light for Yom Kippur also candles. Do you guys do it? Or you're not sure about that? So the truth is, right, some people also light candles for Yom Kippur, just like they do for Shabbat and Yom Tov. So the truth is, that if you light, the blessing is Le'adlik ner shel Yom Kippur, right? Something like that, right? Yom Kippurim. That's what it is, right? So that has its own blessing. Look in your Siddur and you'll find it there, right? Your handy prayer book there. You'll find it there.
I think you do say at the end Yom Kippur.
Right, that's it.
Yeah.
That's what we said.
Yes.
Okay, right. That's the story. Yes. Okay, right. So that's the story there. So that's what we do. Okay, so let's go to Shulchan Aruch, and we're done with this chapter. I think we're done. Okay. There's always some surprises. You never know. Okay, so
Is there a different one for Rosh Hashanah or is that still Yom Tov?
Rosh Hashanah is Yom Tov, right? So therefore, it's the same, right? Because Rosh Hashanah, in effect, is Yom Tov. But Yom Kippur, right? Technically speaking, it's not Yom Tov, right? It's a little bit higher, They say in the Talmud, by the way, in Masechet Megillah, right over there, it says, right, that Shabbat is higher than Yom Tov in terms of the holiness, right? And Yom Tov is higher than I'm sorry, and Yom Kippur. I'm sorry, I didn't say it right. Shabbat is higher than Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur is higher than Yom Tov. That's what it is. So Shabbat is the holiest day, right? When we were kids, right, they used to ask us, trick question, what's the holiest day of the year? So right, the unassuming Jew, right? What does he say? Oh, Yom Kippur, Rabbi. So Rabbi tells you, no, it's Shabbat. Right? It's not Yom Kippur. Shabbat is more holy than Yom Kippur. Yeah. So why do they think it's Yom Kippur, these people, right? These unassuming Jews? Because they don't know that Shabbat is, such a holy day, right? They think it's a joke, They don't take it seriously. God forbid, right? Whatever, right? So they don't know. So for them, these like fried Jews, we call them, right? Secular Jews, whatever, traditional Jews, they think Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. It's not. Doesn't compare to Shabbat. So how do we know, by the way, in halakha, that Shabbat is more holy than Yom Kippur? And how do we know that Yom Kippur is more holy than Shabbat? Where do we learn that? What's the source? Anybody know? Okay, so I'll tell you, right? The way we know is like this, because if a person breaks Shabbat, right, and there was witnesses, right, and he did it on purpose, what's he liable? What's his punishment?
Excommunication.
No, he gets stoned, right? Stoning, right? Stoning, he gets stoned, right? I'm not talking about those right, guys who do drugs getting stoned, right? I'm talking about the real stones. They stone him. Right? That's the punishment for somebody who breaks Shabbat on purpose. Right? When there was a bed din, right? Nowadays we don't have a bed din like that. Right? So we don't have that today. But anyway, right? Technically speaking, that's what Shabbat is. Right?
So what is it today? I thought
I'm
that's what
sorry?
we were talking. What is it today then?
So today, right? You know what the Talmud says, right? I have to tell you. Talmud says, even though there is no bed din today, and therefore, we cannot do capital punishment. But in Shemaim, and from heaven, they do capital punishment. You know what I mean? So in other words, you may think, well, yeah, there's no bed din, but there's a bed din upstairs, and they can do the same thing to you that the bed din down here did.
There's no punishment. There's no consequence here, though. I mean, don't we?
The bed din cannot punish you, that for breaking Shabbat.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, what you're saying is, by the way, it's a good point, which is that can they excommunicate you for breaking Shabbat? So the truth is they can, technically speaking, but we don't do it today. They don't do that either. They don't do it today. We don't excommunicate people today for, like breaking Shabbat and, breaking this and breaking that, right? We just leave them alone. They don't know enough, they're not knowledgeable enough for these things. So we don't punish them like that. So right, so Shabbat is more holy. So what about Yom Kippur? Right? If you break Yom Kippur, what's your punishment? Right. By the way, just to finish that off, right, that point on Shabbat, if you today, right, we don't have bed din. So then, what is the punishment for somebody who breaks Shabbat today, right? So it's called karet, right? It gets cut off from the Jewish people, cutting off. That's what he gets today. At karet, which is from heaven, right? It's a heavenly thing.
Okay, so it's not the same as excommunication from your community.
Right. So, so which one is worse, by the way? Karet, is worse because it's from God. That's more severe, He gets cut off from the Jewish people, right? That's more severe than excommunication. Because when you get excommunicated, you're still a Jew, or whatever. But karet is like you're fried, right? You're finished. You can come back if you do tshuva, but in the meanwhile, right, you're out. Right? So that's Shabbat. Now, what about Yom Kippur, right? So the Yom Kippur is not as holy as Shabbat. So what does that mean? That you get karet, but there's no death penalty on Yom Kippur. If you break Yom Kippur, there's only karet, you get cut off. So it's less than Shabbat, right? In that sense. So what about Yom Tov? Well, what's the punishment? So Yom Tov doesn't have death penalty. It doesn't have karet either. So what is it? It's just like you're transgressing a Torah prohibition. They can lash you for that. You get lashes, right? But there's no karet and there's no death penalty for Yom Tov. So Yom Tov is less than Yom Kippur, which is less than Shabbat, right? That's the way it goes. That's the order. Okay, it's good to know these things, right? It's good to know. Okay. So anyway, right? So I'll read the Shulchan Aruch here. What does it say? That. Okay, I have to go back to sharing. For some reason, I think I may press some button here by mistake. So I'll go back to sharing. Oh, okay. Yeah, I think the app was closed for some reason. Yeah, the app went down. So I gotta get it back up for a second. Just give me a second here. But whatever it was, it was. The truth is, I can even tell you by heart what it says in Shulchan Aruch because it's very short, very simple. But anyway, I'll wait to tell you the real deal. Right, so I'll do share. Give me a second. I apologize for that. Second. Oh, okay, here we go. Okay, back to the share. Okay, so what does it say in the Shulchan Aruch here? It says, המדליק נר של יום טוב צריך לברך שקדישנו במצוותיו וציוונו להדליק נר של יום טוב, right? So when you bless, as we said, when you light the candles for Yom Tov, what do you bless? Right? להדליק נר של יום טוב. That's all you need to know. Okay, so that's the whole story there. Okay, so I guess we'll stop there, Brother Hashem. Now I'll go and pray the morning prayers, right? And you are getting into the night. Okay, so Brother Hashem, thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. I'll be traveling, tomorrow, Brother Hashem. So I'll be back there Wednesday, right, in the afternoon sometime. So hopefully we can organize a class on Wednesday, Brother Hashem, if everything goes good. Until then, right, Chazak Baruch Laila Tov from Jerusalem. And we'll see you soon, Bezat Hashem. We'll see, right? We can do. Maybe we can do tomorrow. I'm not sure. I'll let you know what happens. I don't know exactly how the schedule will go.
Thank
Okay.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
God bless. God bless.